So when people are looking for areas to go dog walking, and this explains sometimes why we get conflict, that time and time again in all the studies, for the majority of dog owners, one of the top thing is actually where can my dog be off lead at some point in the walk. I want to be away from traffic. All these sort of things come back to actually being a good experience and safe and no hassle. You know, sometimes when you hear stuff in the news, you would think that people in the morning get up and think, you know what, I'm bored with my normal dog walks, let's go out today and chase some sheep. You know, that doesn't happen. That's not in their mind. It does happen as a consequence, but it's not the intention. Equally, people tend not to go out and think, oh, I'm a bit bored on my walk, let's go chase some deer. They just want to walk their dogs in a hassle-free way, but often we don't actually give them the information to help them do that. But you can see why that tends to bring us into challenges. So actually, some places where you can have low hassle off-lead walks, for some of it is actually a really important sell. And I know that some of you do produce leaflets and stuff, and in other areas as well, that actually help you do that. Here's, so this is a project in Dorset, and again, often you see a leaflet that will say, here's 20 places where you're not allowed in the park. This is a list of 40 places where you'll be really welcome and your dog can be off-lead, and it's really, really popular. And inherent in that is all the stuff about picking up and stuff like that. And also there's other pressures as well. We don't have a local study for Vale or Glamorgan, but just this study was done in Winchester, so in southern England, and basically it was saying that there's less and less space for dog owners, so you actually often intensifying the conflict. And actually one of the things where there is new housing, and again you've got, maybe not directly here, but in other areas around, they're saying when there is new housing, what you tend to get is that actually there's less green space because you're building on the land, often where there was access or where you could be off lead. And actually we know that in Wales, around 1/3 of all those homes are going to have a dog in them as well. So actually you can see how the problem intensifies. Whereas actually these days, I can't talk about it today, but there's a lot of work I'm involved in actually planning dog-friendly green space, so it makes certain homes more attractive than others, which is great. But walking on the coast or whatever, it's really important if we want people to come and be sort of loyal customers. Because this was some work that was done where, like in Wales, they're increasing access to the coast around England, and some work was done to say, actually, if we introduced a dog ban on this section of coast or on beach, what would be the response? And this is really important when people are thinking about, restricting dogs, because there's a consequence to that. Maybe around 1/4 said they will walk their dogs less often, which isn't good in terms of the dogs or the people staying healthy. Maybe 17% less likely to get another dog, which again, if you've got dogs in shelters, like we've got people from Dogs Trust and RSPCA, that ain't so good either. But actually people are just saying, generally, we're still going to walk our dogs, we're just going to drive further or go somewhere else. And when we ask them, it's like around half we're going to go to, when we ask them to identify where they're going to go, around half picked out farmland, 41% nature reserves, 34% heathland. So this is the thing that when people are talking or councils about restricting, actually you're often displacing. And that's one of the key things they need to think about. So actually some people say, oh, for example, let's ban all off-lead dogs in Cowbridge. Well, that might be okay, but the reality for most of the farmers around here is it means there's going to be more dogs being walked off-lead in farmland, or the potential for that. So it's looking at the big picture. Because as this slide says, if you're trying to restrict, and this is something that might be quite important for your businesses, because if the council's thinking, oh, we might restrict this or do that, or might open somewhere up, might well have an impact on your business. People can, if you're going to restrict access to a park or a bit of coast or whatever, dog owners have one of 4 choices. They can either keep coming if their needs are still met. So that might be, yes, we've got a no dogs area, but we've got an area of the beach where dogs can go to. That's fine. Nobody's saying we want like a dog free for all everywhere. They could go somewhere else. So if it was getting worse here, they could say, actually, we're going to go to Pembrokeshire where we feel more welcome. That might be a response. Pembrokeshire, great. Not so good for you, maybe. They could start writing to their politicians or write to the paper, and it all builds up to give a sort of dog-unfriendly aura, which some people might think okay, but not maybe so good for you folks. Or actually they might just ignore the restriction anyway, because often the council doesn't have enough enforcement staff to deal with it. So what happens is the law-abiding people lose immunity, and the people who stick 2 fingers up at society are generally doing what they did always. So it doesn't tend to work. So people need to plan when they're thinking about restrictions or promotion, about how do we manage that demand. And this isn't something that's unique to England or Wales or Scotland. So for example, this was some work I was doing out in Sydney, and you think of Australia being a big open place and lots of space, which there is in theory, but 15 miles either side of Sydney, there is no beach where you can take your dog on or off lead at any time. And you speak to the council staff and they'll say, oh, well, You know, every little council, because there are lots of little councils involved, will say, have a good reason. Now, at certain times of the year, there are really good reasons. For example, fairy penguins come up and they bury their eggs and have their chicks, and clearly you don't want necessarily people or dogs around there. But then some other council will say, oh, if we have dogs walking on the beach, we'll have more shark attacks. And it's like, really, where's the evidence for that? But every single council would have a good reason why their bit shouldn't have the dogs. And then I went walking on these beaches and saw people with their dogs. And I said, oh, what's going on here? And they said, well, we've nowhere to go. None of the beaches accommodate us, so we just go on the nearest one or the one we like. And every year we put aside $200 to pay the fine when we get caught. So it doesn't work. They think it works, but actually it doesn't. They're just in denial. And one of the things, this is San Francisco, where you've actually got more dogs than children. Some people might think that's great, some might think horrendous, but that's reality. And here, because the City Council and National Park Service, who are the two major landowners around San Francisco, and it's like a peninsula, so people can't move out too far, they've just limited and limited. So you've got areas like this, which is one of the few dog-friendly areas. All the vegetation's gone. The stink of the dog urine here was terrible. I mean, if you have a dog, you know, you get used to, it's like having kids, isn't it? You get used to certain smells and stuff and you deal with it. But this was just yucky. This wasn't a nice place to go. But because there was no planning for it, they just pushed more and more people into a smaller space. And even though they try and enforce it, you know, because all their rangers carry guns and stuff there, it still didn't work. They still have problems. They had more problems because the dogs were fighting more. So you look at how some places have approached it. So this is Banff National Park in Canada. And they're officially, because their national parks, unlike ours, tend not to have people living in them for the most part, generally have no dogs or dogs on leads everywhere. And that was the situation in Banff. But there is a small town there where people do have dogs. And while the rule was officially dogs on leads, people wanted to walk their dogs somewhere, even though here it meant that they might be chased by cougars or bears or whatever, but they wanted to do it. And again, it wasn't working. So actually what they decided to do was to say, actually, we're going to provide a really good, safe place where you can go. And the dog owners used it because they wanted to have a good experience. They didn't want to be ducking under the law, if you like. And the great thing here, ironically, is that one of the things that happens, certainly in some parts of Canada, is these coyotes actually try and lure dogs into the bush so that then the other coyotes kill the dogs. And you see that happening even around built-up areas like Calgary and stuff. Now, some people might think that might be the way to deal with some of your dog issues, that just introduce coyote to the Brecon Beacons or whatever, and then we deal with all the pets. But the great thing is actually the fence here was actually more protecting the dogs from the coyotes. I mean, this was the middle of the day, and these coyotes are very, very cheeky. So yes, but because it was safe and they had a good experience, people wanted to use it. So even here where people as the principal would like to say, no, we would really like dogs everywhere or not near any wildlife, the reality is that doesn't work. So managing that demand is great. And actually, if part of your offer is helping to manage that demand, that can help you have really good, loyal customers. And one of the key things I wanted to point out is that actually dog owners aren't saying we want to be able to go everywhere or everywhere off lead. So this again is some work done down on Greenham Common, which some of you will remember used to be a nuclear, a US base for nuclear missiles. I talk about that now to some people and they've not heard of Greenham Common, which makes me feel particularly old. And once the Americans moved out, then it was opened up for, there was really good wildlife, but they wanted people to walk their dogs. And they did some studies there, and actually most people were coming to walk their dog, but actually 95% accepted the need for some restrictions in some places. You know, nobody was saying we want to go everywhere. And so they actually have some on-lead areas, and they have some no-access areas, but they also have some ponds that are dedicated for dogs and some that are not. So they manage that demand, and that's why it works.